Discovery Houston. While you're looking at Orion, we're getting a pretty tremendous light show. We're looking at the lightning on the Earth.
On September 15th, 1991, American astronauts were transmitting images of Earth from the Space Shuttle Discovery when the camera captured a strange light in our atmosphere. Suddenly, the light appeared to blast into space, seemingly chased by two other lights. NASA dismissed the objects as ice particles that broke off the shuttle. Others call them unidentified flying objects, UFOs. UFOs are as old as ancient Egypt. A 3,000-year-old papyrus from the reign of Thutmose III may be the first account of a UFO.
It was a circle of fire coming in the sky. These things became more numerous. They shone more in the sky than the brightness of the sun. Thereupon these fire circles ascended higher in the sky toward the south. And what happened was ordered by the Pharaoh to be written.
A similar circle of fire appears in the Bible in Ezekiel 1:3. A prophet from the 6th century BC, Ezekiel described,
"A great cloud with brightness round about it, and fire flashing forth continually, and in the midst of the fire gleaming bronze. And from the midst of it came the likeness of 4 living creatures. Now as I look at the living creatures, I see a wheel upon the earth, one for each of the 4 of them, and their rims were full of eyes round about. When the living creatures rose from the earth, the wheels rose."
He talks about a bronze wheel, wheel within wheels, a fire coming down, which could very easily be the corona that is so often described as associated with a disc-shaped craft. He describes seeing the smaller craft come down and land and people coming out.
Later, Ezekiel says, "The Spirit lifted me up."
This may well be similar to many reports we get today of experiencers or contactees being lifted through the air, up a beam of light into the craft.
Nearly 2,000 years after Ezekiel, on the other side of the world, another strange sight appeared in the sky. On September 12th, 1271, in Taksakanuchi, Japan, a powerful priest named Nijiran is about to be beheaded by a jealous warlord. Suddenly, a moving object appears in the sky. It is shiny and round and blindingly bright. The terrified executioners run for their lives, and the priest is saved by this strange flying object. Throughout medieval Japan, the unexplainable was commonplace. In 1389, 3 round objects of unusual brilliance were seen to join together into one large object in the sky. Then in 1458, the emperor himself was alarmed by the sudden appearance of 5 stars circling the moon. These stars changed colors 3 times, then sped off and vanished. In Kyoto in 1606, samurai warriors spotted a whirling ball of fire resembling a red wheel hovering near their castle. Strange objects likewise darkened the skies of medieval Europe. At the end of the 12th century, William of Newburgh wrote that monks in North Yorkshire, England saw a flat, round, silvery discus which flew over the abbey and caused utmost terror. French theologian Pierre Boestuau was similarly alarmed by the apparition of December 5th, 1577.
About the sun, many dark clouds appeared, such as we are wont to see during great storms. Out of these clouds have come forth reverberations resembling large, tall, and wide hats, and the earth showed itself yellow, and seemed to be covered in hips, which appeared in various colors such as red, blue, green, and most of them black. It is easy for everyone to think of the meaning of this miracle, which is God wants to induce men to amend their lives and make penance.
Flying hats coming out of the sky. I mean, it sounds bizarre, and ufologists read this and say, these are, round spacecraft landing, More likely is these are tornadoes or cylindrical clouds. I mean, you can go out on any given day and look at clouds and say, there's a dragon, and there's this, there's that, there's a hat. There's a spacecraft. And some of these things might be illuminated by lightning, backlit by the sun, to cast these sort of eerie shadows on the ground. Let's say you took this really weird-looking cloud that looks kind of like a UFO. 400 or 500 years ago, somebody might think, it's this weird thing. It's a landing craft of some kind. But we would look at it and say, well, it's a cloud that just looks like something we're seeing, but it's just a cloud.
The late 19th century, like medieval Europe, was a time of miracles, of new marvels like the telephone and the automobile. But invention led to fabrication. Thousands of Americans across the country reported seeing an object that did not yet exist, an airship. In April 1897, the Chicago Times-Herald published an account of an airship sighting by Robert Lowen of Evanston, Illinois. Through field glasses, Lowen saw 4 lights, green and white, some distance apart and moving in unison in the sky. Several other people observed a similar craft. The body of the night flyer was about 70 feet in length, of slender proportion and fragile construction. To this body were attached a movable headlight and other lights. That same month, the Chicago Record reported that a great black airship was seen by 10,000 people in Kansas City. The object appeared very swiftly and hovered over the city for 10 minutes. After flashing green, blue, and white lights, it shot off into space. Throughout April, the sightings continued in California, Washington, and Canada. Then the stories and the airships vanished until 6 years later, when the Wright brothers took to the sky at Kitty Hawk and the public's imagination took wing as well.
In the late 19th century is when science fiction really got its start with books by Jules Verne and H.G. Wells, and this was in conjunction with flying experiments, glider experiments. The Wright brothers were tinkering and so on.
Just as the turn of the century ushered in fantasies of flight, mid-century spawned dreams about space.
Consider the 1950s. We have this, a boom in science fiction. The space age is just beginning. It's Cold War anxieties. The Russians are doing this. The Russians are doing that. All this secret stuff. It's not surprising that people started seeing spacecraft. After all, we were building spacecraft by the early 1960s, and so if it's possible to do it, why isn't it certain that it's already happening, at least in somebody's mind?
On June 24th, 1947, unidentified flying objects were finally identified, at least by name. A civilian pilot named Kenneth Arnold was searching for a marine transport plane that had crashed in the Cascade Mountain in Washington. Near Mount Rainier, he saw a blinding flash out the side window, then another. He located the source. 9 gleaming objects flying in 2 parallel rows at fantastic speed. The whole world would remember the way he described them. He said they sort of skip and skim the way a saucer skips over water. Arnold's story of flying saucers alarmed the U.S. Air Force. They believed that during World War II, the Nazis had been testing a new form of aircraft, a turbine-driven saucer device. Plans and even some photos surfaced, including one with a German tank cannon. The saucer itself was never found, and the photo was later judged to be a hoax. But the Air Force worried that if a Nazi saucer did exist, it might have fallen into Russian hands. To investigate the rash of strange sightings, they hired Dr. J. Allen Hynek, a professor of astronomy at Northwestern University in Illinois. At first a skeptic, Hynek discovered that nearly 20% of UFOs could not be explained. Hynek labeled these sightings close encounters and classified them into 3 types: In the first, a UFO is spotted. In the second, evidence like landing marks is left behind. In a close encounter of the third kind, alien creatures are actually seen. For 20 years, Hynek tracked UFOs. The scientific community saw him as an obsessed eccentric. He kept up the search in retirement until his death in 1986, yet found no evidence of alien visitors. But some ufologists believe the Air Force withheld the proof. The Air Force itself had a first-hand encounter with UFO on October 1st, 1948. Flying over North Dakota, Second Lieutenant George Gorman spotted a lighted object.
It was about 6 to 8 inches in diameter and round, without fuzz at the edges. It was blinking on and off. As I approached, the light became steady and pulled into a sharp left bank. I dived after it, but I couldn't catch up with the thing.
The shaken pilot told investigators that the object moved as if guided by reason. Air traffic controllers in Fargo confirmed the object's high rate of speed. In the early 60s, official reports of flying saucers plummeted. UFOs would have vanished off our collective radar were it not for pop culture, which picked up the flag and ran. Amusement parks featured space themes, and B-movies kept UFOs flying high. Then, in the middle of a decade of protest, a small band of Americans began to speak out about an incident they claimed was covered up 20 years before.
In 1947 alone, every state of the Union except one reported flying disc-shaped objects in the sky that were performing at unbelievable rates. If you look at Roswell as an isolated incident, you have to ask yourself, what is this spaceship doing in New Mexico? On the face of it as one fact, it makes no sense whatsoever. But you put it in context of the summer of 1947 and you say, oh, I understand, they were all over the place. And they found themselves focusing on New Mexico. And yes, one came down.
In 1947, newspapers had astounded readers with reports of a flying saucer that crashed on a farm near the town of Roswell, New Mexico. But the Air Force quickly refuted the story, stating that the flying saucer was merely a weather balloon.
I am here to discuss the so-called flying saucers. The Air Force interest in this problem has been due to our feeling of an obligation to identify and analyze to the best of our ability anything in the air that may have the possibility of threat or menace to the United States.
In the 1960s, a number of people who were first-hand witnesses to not the crash, but to the subsequent follow-up of the military's involvement and their attempt to stop any information coming out of that area started coming forward. Credible witnesses who actually handled material, saw material, or were part of the actual examination and subsequent, perhaps, disposal of the bodies that were recovered.
The legend of the Roswell saucer and the alien bodies has grown over the years, until now it has become an icon for the supposed government cover-up of the existence of UFOs. Russ Estes is a documentary producer who has studied the Roswell crash.
The incident at Roswell, New Mexico is probably our best possible scenario for alien contact because of the number of witnesses involved, the reports of debris, the type of debris, the amount of cover-up that has most obviously taken place over the years. It keeps drawing us back to Roswell 50 years later saying, you know, this is the one that requires the hardest look.
A native of Roswell, Frankie Rowe remembers her father's account of the crash.
He was so excited he couldn't hardly talk. He told us that they had gotten a call that morning. They thought they were going to go out to a plane crash. And when they got out there, what it actually was the crash of a flying saucer. And he said that when they arrived, there was one little person that was still walking around outside of the craft, and two that they knew were dead because they had already been covered over and wrapped up in what he called body bags. They all knew the sadness. They could feel the sadness that this little person had over losing the companions. And the person told them that they couldn't help in any way. So they had only been there just a few minutes when the military arrived. And after the military got there, they chased them away.
The problem now is that it's half a century old. And we're left with this question as well, how good the memory is, how much is being distorted, how much are we leading the memory, and there's no way to really tell at this point what's totally objective, what's subjective, except the few people who were directly threatened by the military and told that if they divulged what they had heard or what they had seen, their bodies would be found, or their bleached bones would be found decades later under the sands in New Mexico.
Something happened at Roswell. Best guess that we have found was contact by an alien craft. If someone were looking at us, looking for a signal, in 1945, 100 miles from Roswell, a signal was set off. It was called the atomic bomb. After that, the only place in the world where rockets were being launched into space was right outside of Roswell. Atomic testing continued right outside of Roswell. The only nuclear strike base in the world was at Roswell. Beacons, lots of beacons. So consequently, there's the place to look.
According to some locals, the Roswell saucer and the bodies of its alien occupants were taken to a top-secret Air Force base near Groom Lake, Nevada, known only as Area 51. The Air Force has never confirmed the existence of this base, but it's famous nonetheless. Enthusiasts line distant peaks to catch glimpses of unusual aircraft performing UFO-like maneuvers.
A bright object is being spotted right there, suddenly.
There have been rumors for more than 20 years that the government has acquired either partially destroyed or intact UFOs that have either been captured or given to us through some mechanism. There have been a lot of unusual aeroforms seen, videotaped, photographed in the area that display behavioral characteristics, meaning flight dynamics, which are highly atypical of fixed-wing or rotorcraft, producing high-G maneuvers and sudden shifts in directional attitude that aircraft we know of today cannot duplicate. We don't have any hardware, we don't have any software, we don't have any bodies, so we're left, the question is, it's open for conjecture, speculation, and until something more substantial comes forward, there's not much we can do about it.
Something substantial may have already emerged. In the spring of 1961, Robert Dean saw something unearthly in the sky.
And it was out about 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning on the West Range, and we were out there because Republic or one of the aircraft companies was preparing to launch a radio-controlled drone. Just about 7:30, I believe it was, somebody started pointing over a little farther to the west. We all turned our head. We looked over there and we saw an absolutely beautiful, what I remember as a metallic object, 200 yards away, roughly 100 feet above the ground. And it was sitting there, motionless, silent. But it was so streamlined and so aerodynamically shaped and so beautiful, and it was reflecting the morning sun.
The object made no sound, neither did the men watching.
We were all standing there with our mouths hanging open. The object began to bob a little more, and then all of a sudden it began to move away. And then, at an incredible rate of speed, it rose and flew out of sight. And then, of course, all of us being in the military, either military or civilian, we were sworn to secrecy. Most of us who were present that day assumed we had seen a high-tech U.S. Air Force or Army piece of technology up there. The fact that we were sworn to secrecy, the fact that we were all debriefed thoroughly, I was not to realize until later what we had really seen that morning. It was a UFO.
The ultimate UFO encounter was played out in the 70s on the movie screen. Though a commercial success, Close Encounters of the Third Kind didn't get us any closer to the truth. Interest in UFOs actually waned, mainly because of the lack of any evidence. Then, about a decade later, a sky full of evidence fell upon us. In 1987, a Swiss farmer named Billy Meyer released dozens of photos he claimed to have taken of UFOs. What's more, Meyer claimed dozens of contacts with extraterrestrials. A research team of UFO enthusiasts from the U.S. visited Meyer and interviewed him.
A person who came out of the disc.
Person came out?
Yeah. And when the person came out of the left side of the trees there, I have seen that it is a woman.
And you sat here and talked to her?
Yeah, then we was talking here for about 1 hour or 1 hour and a quarter, something like that.
Did she give you a name? What did you call her?
Yeah, she told me her name is Semyase.
Semyase?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, this case has become intensely tangled up. For one thing, many people tried to figure out how Billy took the pictures, and so they made models of their own. And they pictures faked or representations of the saucers were put in Billy's hands and were part of his collection. Investigators would come to the farm, find these pictures among the, quote, valid Billy Meyer pictures, walk away with them, do the science, find the string, determine that one Billy Meyer picture is a hoax, and hence all of Billy Meyer's pictures are a hoax. And this logic doesn't necessarily hold. What you're looking for is the one Billy Meyer picture that you can prove is not a hoax. But we can tell you that this photo is of a craft as big as Billy said it was, as far away from the camera as Billy said it was, with no apparent means of aerodynamic support, and of a solid object of some material and not a photographic fake.
The same year Meyer was shooting his film, a home builder named Ed Walters captured these images over a span of 6 months in the town of Gulf Breeze near Pensacola, Florida. Dr. Bruce Maccabee, an optical physicist formerly with the Office of Naval Intelligence, has analyzed Ed Walters' photographs and videotape.
The most important thing about Ed's July 21st video is the presence of a shadow of the UFO on the trees, the tree line on the other side of Santa Rosa Sound. And you can see when the UFO comes into the field of view from the left-hand side, moves over towards the right, reverses and goes back off to the left. At the same time the UFO is moving, you can see a darkening, a shadow that moves along the tree line over to the right, stops, and then moves back to the left again. And that is something that I don't think anyone has ever captured on video before.
It's his analysis, and it's been heavily criticized by others in the field because some of it doesn't add up, some of it does add up. I think it was models, and unfortunately models were found in Ed Walters' old house that generically conformed to the shape of some of the vehicles that were photographed. So here we go again with another case that could be, couldn't be, maybe. It seems like there's always some disinformation or misinformation involved, and the further one looks into the case, the more problematic it becomes, and like everything else in ufology, it ends with a big question mark.
It's this big question mark that keeps people searching. Is there any proof at all? Sifting through the legends, listening to the fables, the answer seems as obscure as the source of the Pharaoh's circle of fire. One thing is clear. Over the centuries, thousands of people from every corner of the globe have reported seeing things in the sky we can't explain away. Whether they're real or not, UFOs have become a part of our culture. Surveys indicate a majority of people are inclined to believe in them, even without scientific evidence. As we search for strange objects in the heavens, hoping to find the answers to so many questions, perhaps what we really see is ourselves.
discover Houston, while you're looking at Orion, we're getting a pretty tremendous light show. We're looking at the lightning on the Earth.
On September 15, 1991, American astronauts were transmitting images of Earth from the Space Shuttle Discovery when the camera captured a strange light in our atmosphere. Suddenly, the light appeared to blast into space, seemingly chased by two other lights. NASA dismissed the objects as ice particles that broke off the shuttle. Others call them unidentified flying objects, UFOs.
Fire gleaming bronze, and from the midst of it came the likeness of four living creatures. Now as I look at the living creatures, I see a wheel upon the earth, one for each of the four of them, and their rims were full of eyes round about. When the living creatures rose from the earth, the wheels rose.
He talks about a bronze wheel, wheel within wheels, a fire coming down, which could very easily be the corona that is so often described as associated with a disc-shaped craft. He describes seeing the smaller craft come down and land and people coming out.
Later, Ezekiel says, "The Spirit lifted me up."
This may well be similar to many reports we get today of experiencers or contactees being lifted through the air, up a beam of light into the craft.
An appearance of 5 stars circling the moon. These stars changed colors 3 times, then sped off and vanished. In Kyoto in 1606, samurai warriors spotted a whirling ball of fire resembling a red wheel hovering near their castle. Strange objects likewise darkened the skies of medieval Europe. At the end of the 12th century, William of Newburgh wrote that monks in North Yorkshire, England saw a flat, round, silvery discus which flew over the abbey and caused utmost terror. French theologian Pierre Boestuau was similarly alarmed by the apparition of December 5th, 1577.
About the sun, many dark clouds appeared, such as we are wont to see during great storms.
UFOs are as old as ancient Egypt. A 3,000-year-old papyrus from the reign of Thutmose III may be the first account of a UFO.
It was a circle of fire coming in the sky. These things became more numerous. They shone more in the sky than the brightness of the sun. Thereupon these fire circles ascended higher in the sky toward the south. And what happened was ordered by the Pharaoh to be written.
A similar circle of fire appears in the Bible in Ezekiel 1:3. A prophet from the 6th century BC, Ezekiel described,
"A great cloud with brightness round about it, and fire flashing forth continually, and in the midst of the..."
Nearly 2,000 years after Ezekiel, on the other side of the world, another strange sight appeared in the sky. On September 12th, 1271, in Taksakanuchi, Japan, a powerful priest named Nijiran is about to be beheaded by a jealous warlord. Suddenly, a moving object appears in the sky. It is shiny and round and blindingly bright. The terrified executioners run for their lives, and the priest is saved by this strange flying object. Throughout medieval Japan, the unexplainable was commonplace. In 1389, 3 round objects of unusual brilliance were seen to join together into one large object in the sky. Then in 1458, the emperor himself was alarmed by the sudden